Nick.
Hi, Eve. How you doing?
Hi, everyone.
You guys
Good
were
to
live.
see you.
Always a good start there. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to another edition of Team Superheroes. Very excited today to have the two gentlemen that are joining us here on the screen, Mukesh and Nick from Novartis. These gentlemen have a great story that they're going to share with us around their team's governance model and how they actually automated the process itself. Before we get started here, also on the end, we've got Eve and we've got Tim, who both work with Novartis and are from Microsoft. So they're going to be helping out, answering your questions as we go along, as well as popping in any great questions that we get live. So feel free to ask questions as we're going along. You can keep them private or we can share them publicly, whatever you prefer. And you just do that by hitting the little Q&A window on the top there. And then again, reminder, a little bit of housekeeping, so to speak, that we will send out the recorded video after the call, so you can see it again and leverage with your peers internally. A little bit of background here before I turn over to Nick and Mukesh and they share a bit of their story. We were chatting through this process, and as you can imagine at Microsoft, when we're working with organizations all over the planet of all different shapes and sizes, is a lot of them are asking us questions such as this, right? Or asking us for feedback. And so we often find ourselves having conversations around, do many of you find yourself with too many teams? Where you get to the point where you've got the sprawl of tens of thousands potentially of teams across your organization because you kept it open. And now you're coming to either Microsoft or to your peers or to our partner network, and you're figuring out, how do we actually manage and govern these teams? How do we reduce some of that noise, so to speak, so we can make it easiest for our people to not only maintain and be a part of the teams that are most important to them, but also to make sure that we have continuity with these teams, right? So that if somebody potentially leaves the organization, we're not stuck with the team without an owner. And so what I thought would be great is Nick, maybe if you would give us a little bit of background on the way that you guys approach this before we get into the actual automation and the solution that you guys created. Because so many organizations ask us, do we lock down team creation? Should we keep it open? What's a best practice? And I love the way that you guys approach this. Funny enough, very similar to the way that we did, but I think it'd be very valuable for folks to hear your perspective before we get into your solution.
Sure. Thanks, Jace. So basically, when we started looking at Teams and launching as a new service within Novartis, we took a step back and we looked at all the lessons we learned from the other O365 services that we had put out over the past years. And I've worked at Novartis for 9 years, and I've always been involved in the SharePoint space. And even with all the governance controls that we tried to wrap around and implement on top of SharePoint, we never really had a good handle on the lifecycle management portion and the inventory management aspects of it. And we've gone from SharePoint 2010 migrations to SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2013 to O365. And every time we've done this, it's been a struggle to check with the inventory, what sites are still being used, how are these being managed. So we thought with Teams we have a fresh opportunity to do this right the first time before it goes out the door, and eliminate a lot of the process that frustrates our customers and a lot of the garbage that we have to migrate time to time again. So we started looking at Teams as more of a transactional experience rather than a permanent asset that'll sit within the company. So right away we knew we wanted to implement some controls to govern the ultimate life cycle of how teams live. So we looked to do first to group expiration policies to manage the life cycle of it, so that we knew that teams had a lifespan. If they were active, we would keep it. If they weren't, they would phase out of the organization. In terms of the process to provision them, we have a really successful Yammer implementation within Novartis. It's very popular, and it's had the open creation model since day one. It's left a lot of garbage in the Yammer estate for communities that may have gone by the wayside, but that's okay. We're working on cleaning that now with the same group expiration policies. But we knew we wanted to bring that same experience to Teams, where if someone needs to start collaborating on that tool, it should be simple to implement it and get it right away. With SharePoint, we had all these processes in front of it to do site owner trainings, verification, collect inventory information. And about 2 years ago, I'm not proud to say it took at least a week to get a standard SharePoint site provisioned within Novartis. About a year ago, through some automation activities, we were able to cut that down to an hour. But even that, there really shouldn't be a delay in these type of processes because of the information that IT needs to collect in order to manage the inventory. So with Teams, we wanted to make sure that we were following our Yammer model for open creation, but still putting all the right governance controls in place to get the information that IT would need in the future to manage the inventory of sites that we do have.
That's awesome. Hey, Tim, I'm gonna put you on the spot here, so forgive me because I didn't call this out when we were chatting. But you've mentioned this so many times when we've talked about Novartis, and you and I have been geeking out on their culture. And for context, Tim again is the customer success manager for Microsoft who looks after it. I would imagine, correct me if you feel differently, that culture also plays a huge part in this, and the openness and the way that Nick and the team approach this. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I mean, Novartis has 3 cultural pillars that they're building around, which is this idea of being curious, inspired, and unbossed. And I guess what I've observed is in the decision-making process throughout the organization, people are saying, hey, is this decision reinforcing those values or moving us further away from them? And so when Novartis came up against something like this, do we restrict who can create teams? Well, that's not really an unbossed culture. And so Nick and his team were able to say, hey, look, this is what aligns with what we're trying to drive in the organization. And I think there's a really interesting parallel there around private channels, which is probably something that a lot of the people on this call are also having to contend with. And maybe it's a good time to throw it back to Nick and Mukesh to kind of explain, like, private channels, there's a plus side and a minus side, and what would you look at when you're making that kind of decision about whether to enable that?
Sure.
So far we actually have not introduced private channels within Novartis, and the main primary reason is because of a gap it creates in our e-discovery process when the new SharePoint site gets spun up in the background. And we're working to close that out and reintroduce it. But like you said, Tim, because we do have that open culture, and because Teams in itself, the different way of working, does kind of promote the openness that all these members of the teams should have access to the content, and whether they need it or not, it's more of a pulling of the information rather than pushing it. I'm hesitant to push it out as quickly as we did with Teams. We want to try to let the culture adjust to that mindset before we make that as an available option. And even when we reintroduce it, that is the one piece that we will wrap some process around so people understand the limitations and management overhead that comes with private channels.
So this is all great background. Nick, now looking at the slide that we got up here on the business challenge you guys had, when you guys started going down this path, and what we'll show here in a bit, and then Mukesh will give us a little insight into, how many teams are you guys roughly at this point?
At this point, we were less than 3,000 teams.
Okay, and so then what we're looking at right here on the slide came up, where you guys started thinking about the strategy and the potential looming challenge, if you will, of the team sprawl, and how do you actually make sure that you cover owners? Is that fair to say?
Yep, that's fair.
Okay, and then anything you want to walk us through on this slide, or are we good to kind of move on and get to the solution itself?
The main thing is we really didn't want to impact the current model that we'd already established with Yammer. So any restrictions that we would have looked at done on group creation or any front end that we would put in front of Teams as a process would have thrown off what we already had established for our other services, which was working really well. And it was really just a matter of being able to collect the information we needed, not so much as anything that impacted the end users of the Teams platform directly.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry, I just realized I had you on the backside. So I got that. I got
Sure.
the inventory reports and then the Teams lifecycle. So that's great. Now, going into the solutions that you all consider, because I believe you went through quite a few different conversations with Microsoft, with some third-party vendors. Could you guys maybe walk us through what you considered end to end?
Sure, and Mukesh, correct me if I leave anything out here. So we had looked at a couple of third-party products like Modality for putting up forms in front of all the services so that we could create a front-end interface that would collect the information and then do the post-provisioning actions afterwards. Our standard process was to require trainings on the services, but I mean the trainings really were more of a checkbox that, hey, we did something, and then the trainings become outdated over years. My training, I believe, was on SharePoint 2007, 10 years ago, so doesn't really apply to the current platforms that we have today. but we knew we didn't want to sit something in front of the system. We didn't want to have you leave the team shell in order to get a team. And every solution that we were looking at really led you in that direction. Mukesh, did I miss anything on that you would add?
No, the main challenge was that even if we put out something like a customized form or anything, that solution that we talked about, the challenge was anybody could just go to teams.microsoft.com or just open up a client and click on that, spin up a team. Would really put us in trouble that, okay, we have two different channels now, right? So that's the main reason we step back from all these. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, perfect. And then so on that, sorry, just pulling my slides back up here. So the solution that you ended up going with, would love you guys to talk us through the scoping, the phases here, requirements, considerations, sort of the end-to-end detail here.
Sure. So Nick and I were started brainstorming a lot even before we reaching out to our content management or our end user experience team, because we wanted to have some sort of understanding in-house that, okay, this is what we're going to do, right? So the initial thoughts were around, absolutely it was the graph. We were not going for anything with PowerShell, because graph we could use a lot of liberty querying with a single app. So we are currently doing that. So we started with graph, and even I had a basic script in place, and then we had the monthly visit from our PFE, Akash Basavaraj. I want to just highlight his name. He has been doing amazing in that space, and the great help we received. In fact, he brought me into the Power Platform space, because when I think about a solution, I think about the opportunities that we could potentially leverage using Flow or the Power Apps. Earlier that wasn't the case. It was all about writing a script with a lot of line codes and everything. So Akash suggested,
just in case anybody on the call isn't aware, could you explain your Microsoft PFE, what that means?
The premium field engineer, which we have the contract part of the contract between Novartis and Microsoft. We get dedicated support from Microsoft in each service area. A dedicated support from the premium field engineers from Microsoft side. This is on a monthly assignment, like a week dedicated support. Most likely, yeah, it used to be on site. Akash used to come to our Hyderabad office. So that's how it used to work. So Akash was our prime focus for SharePoint and Power Platform and things.
You guys started looking at scripts, graph, and then had your discussion with Akash, and he brought you guys to
Akash put the idea of why don't we use Power Platform, like the Flow, instead of going in the graph side, because that would the whole idea was that to avoid scripting and scheduling and things and all. Instead, we stick to this and see how this would be useful. So we started building the solution in the sandbox, and I would say the Flow one was a complete help from Akash. He worked internally, and I think he brought some, information from your engineering team as well as we had requested. Because when we put this design, okay, this is what we need. That Flow one, which I'm going to take you guys through, the initial, or I would say the 80% of the Flow one was directly from Akash when we started with it. Then I was convinced, and I took it to Nick, and Nick was convinced that, okay, we understood that this is scalable solution. You don't want to go and write or change the code like everything, but it's all about you pulling in another action or changing certain logics, and it's quite scalable. And we added, as I said, if you look at the phase 2, we just started with one flow at the beginning. Today we have a set of 4 flow which is managing this, and I'm going to introduce another one in the next couple of weeks, a 5th one to do another processing. So we all started with dynamic inventory process, but as we grown and we scaled out this solution, it picked up the external file sharing enablement by the requester itself, the owner. Then we are started managing single owner teams. If it is identified as a team is with only one owner, then we are explicitly asking the requester to add additional owners to have managing the team space to align with the governance policies.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but this was a big challenge you were trying to solve right here, right? That single owner.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah, still a struggle.
it's still a struggle, and we have another process in place which runs on a quarterly basis. We send notification to every single owner asking to update it. At this point, we do not have any action if they haven't done something, but we are talking about doing that, like, probably think about archiving the team temporarily, asking them to go and do it, or directly post some messages in the teams, stuff like that. Yeah. So single owner, yeah, it's a problem, and the main challenge is the single owners are the potential candidates for zero owner teams, because somebody leaves the organization, AD deletes that, and then you will have a team without an owner. So that's what we have seen.
Right, and then coming back to the activity-based expirations that we implemented, it was important that we had more than one person accountable for doing that renewal. If someone happened to be on leave or on vacation, we didn't want that to become a basis for losing content.
Just called out, I love the approach, because it wasn't about harnessing and reining in the ability to create teams. Is you actually just wanted to make sure that, and forgive me for simplifying all the amazing work you guys did, but you really just wanted to make sure that you were effectively managing the teams and the ones that were created. And I mean, just for context here, once you guys are building this solution, Nick or Mukesh, are you guys still at 3,000-ish teams, or where are you at this point?
No, we have around 45 to 50,000. I think 40,000 plus 45,000 teams are there.
So a huge amount of teams that you guys want to go back and make sure that everyone's got double owners, just so you can keep the continuity on the team, right?
Yeah.
And our official launch was only in March, so.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then, so great background there too. And then Mukesh, anything you want to cover there on the requirements and the considerations? I think you guys touched most of it, but just to make sure.
Yes, as I called out in the beginning, right? The solution what we have today is quite scalable, but the complexity of the solution is that the flow itself, it takes care of some HTTP calls from the flow itself. It connects, I mean, it even does some SharePoint REST API calls using HTTP connectors. It even triggers automation services, webhooks in the Azure automation services. So we have a lot of things connected to this. So all these thoughts just popped out. Like when we look into a solution, there are certain solutions which are not really feasible to have everything being included within a flow and have that triggered within that flow. So the option was to connect the solution to our Azure services as well, like the webhooks or whatever I just said. So this is quite scalable. And as I said, I'm working on a few enhancements, like at this point, as I said, the dynamic inventory purpose, we are explicitly asking the requester or the owner of the team to confirm which is their division of Novartis and etc. Right. So the solution today I'm testing is that we have the owner details with us. So why don't we just query user profiles of that particular user through SharePoint REST API? I couldn't use the out-of-the-box connector because out-of-the-box connector populates directly from the Azure AD and we do not get any custom attributes. So I switched my logic to query it through the search so that all the custom attributes also get populated. And I'm trying to take that into consideration. And then if there is no response from a user, we see that because the response is a huge problem for us. We potentially would close it. The loop will be closed by injecting these user profile details into the group's custom attribute. So that's an enhancement that we are currently putting in place. So if it was doing it through a script, I'm pretty sure that it's going to be another 50-liner or 100-liner, piece. So, yeah.
Got it. Okay, so that's a great background then on the decision that you had. Speaking to Akash versus the the flow or the Power Automate
Absolutely.
versus the scripts.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Mukesh, would it be all right if I know you were planning on showing us what you guys actually created in some of the flows? It's a shout out to Rick and Morty right there, by the way, if anyone's fan. But I'll if you want to share your screen, I'll switch over presenter rights and get you up there live.
Sure. Let me know when you're able to see my screen.
Got you coming up. And you are live, sir.
All right, perfect. So as I said, we have a set of 4 flows which take care of all these processes, starting from collecting the log, teams information through processing the request which we receive from the end users or from the requester, right? So I'll take you through each of them. This is the flow 1, and here what we do is that this runs on a daily basis in the early hours of Central European times, and okay, we have the variables defined here, and what we do is we're not directly calling the graph for getting the teams, and we are leveraging audit log information to get the groups created in the last 24 hours. Okay, so it's basically the add group function, the functionality within the audit logs we query for the last 24 hours, and then put it through the loop. And this is very interesting. When we started, whenever you query anything using the graph, the first 100 results will be displayed, and the rest of the rest of the pages will go into an OData links as a variable, and you have to get that and process it again until to get the anything which is beyond 100 results. Any output which is coming beyond 100, you have to put it this through. So we query this against our audit log, and through the HTTP graph call using the auth. So as I said, we have the app registered, and you need to have this app having access to query audit logs. Yep. So then we define using this results, what we get here, we parse this JSON to a readable format, and then we create variables out of this. The initiated by is nothing but who created the group. So many of these variables are easily, just pick them from the variables like the dynamic expressions available out there in the flow itself. But there are certain things like team's ID, team's name. It's not straightforward. You have to make your own expressions, to get them, because they are within the loop, and within the loop they are defined as arrays. So we have to pick which array it is and which object within that, and etc. So team's name, team's IDs are we picked it up like that. And then there is a group type, and this is the key piece here. The group type defines which action generated or created the All365 group, because as I said, we are querying add group, not anything specific to teams. So this is the point where we define whether it is a team specific, like it comes here. We have a check if the group is MS type. So this output, we see if it is created out of Microsoft Teams services. So if this is yes, it comes and it falls under that category where, okay, it's created out of. And we notice one thing is that this value will be null for Teams if it is created out of Admin Center. And I believe nobody is doing that. This is valid only when you create it from a browser or through a client. So anything which is created out of the Admin Center, this value is null. So for the end user, so this is perfect for us. So we get into
before you go on.
Sure.
There's a great question that I'd love to throw out here. So someone asked about pulling attributes from SharePoint. So going back on earlier, the question was, shouldn't they be the same in Azure AD, or was it specific SharePoint attributes like user number that, for example, that you were pulling? I'm
sorry, I did that question.
So pulling the user profile attributes to populate the field in the form, right? We have there's a limited set of attributes that we have available in Azure Active Directory, and then our SharePoint user profile actually feeds in a lot of our HR information. So we have a lot more profile attributes in our SharePoint profile than we do in Active Directory.
Awesome. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut your flow there, but it's a great question.
No, so no worry. I thought this was something related to this one there. That's why I was just trying to relate it there. Yeah, we will come to that point. It's in the next one actually. Yeah. So in fact, there is this one I'm working on. Yeah. So, all right. So this is where we pick we check the condition. This particular group, it matches with Microsoft Teams services, and we get in here. We already does a query against the existing items in the SharePoint list. This is to make sure that we have seen some instances where we have seen some duplications. We could do it in one way by making Teams ID column within the SharePoint list as take only unique values. But the problem was when that is done, the flow was not able to write the entry back into the list, and that causes the flow to fail. And even if there are 100 entries in this flow, even if one entry fails, the end result of the flow will be shown as failure, even if it's just one single failure. So as part of a error handling mechanism, we are calling all the entries from the list and matching it with team's ID equals the output what we are getting here, and then checking if there is a valid entry within that list to make sure that there is no, if there is a duplicate entry, we just skip that. It's highly unlikely, but we have seen some 3 or 4 instances like that to just make sure that we are handling it well. And then once it's all passed, the conditions are passed, it just comes here and creates the entry within our SharePoint list with the team's name on a claim. It's nothing but the UPN, team's ID, and the created date. And then we give a couple of, this is the enhancement that I'm working on. We give a couple of minutes delay. So this could be, I would say, this is a best practice, I would say, but it is not written anywhere. We have seen some false positives happening with HTTP. It's okay, Tim. We have seen some false positive happenings with HTTP calls because the HTTP action says that it is successful. When the load is high, out of 100, we have seen some 5 to 6 are really not happen, but still it is saying is successful. So what I did is that I put a couple of delay before the HTTP call. So any action which comes here, it stops for like 2 or 3 seconds, then triggers the HTTP call. And we've seen that that's really gone. I mean, that errors and the false positives were not happening. So what it really does here is it's basically querying the primary channel of the team. The intention is that the moment that this particular team is added to the list of our inventory, we want to add a tab within the general channel, I'm sorry, as a website, which talks about the best practices of the teams, or the teams on a guide, we say it as. We're currently working on that, the teams on a guide. So it talks about the best practices and the do's and the don'ts and everything about the the teams and the expiration policy, whatever just we talked about in the beginning. So this will come as a tab added into the general channel. So this is the compose. You basically give your website URL and the content URL, and this is the team's app ID you have to use. The cool thing with this that this is an app already existing with every team which you create, the website. So you don't need to anything explicitly install into the team. So it just make that compose and then throw another HTTP post and to the tab, and it just works. So this is the flow one it does. Like I think on a daily basis, we process around like 500 to 1,000 teams these days. So when we opened up this for everybody in March, it was crazy. It was going beyond 1,000 to nearly 2,000 we have seen. But now, yeah, it's 500 to 1,000. That's what the number we see. With this, in the current existing production one as well, we have a delay, which we set it as 5 seconds. So after every creation, there will be a 5-second delay. So which in that way, we are making sure that no more 30 instances of items are being created in the list, and no more 30 instances of flows are generated in 1 minute. So this is all just the math we have done after going into production by seeing a lot of throttling issues and all to make sure that everything falls in place. So in that way, I think we were able to keep everything in check, especially from a threshold and throttling. So
yep. Sorry, Mukesh, there's a question that's come up. Somebody's asked what kind of licensing is required in order to get this to work.
So at least one P1 or P2 should work because HTTP is a premium connector and it should work with both P1 and P2. We have a P2, so all I'm using is a single P2 license, and the users who use the Power Apps to put any of these requests, they don't need a premium license because we are not using any premium connectors in the Power Apps. So it's a standalone flow which works behind the scenes. So it's just one premium license. But having said, the best practice is that we can have, this is something that I spoke to Nick last week about getting another 1 or 2 more premium license to create multiple connectors within the same flow using different premium accounts, so that the load against one account will be like brought down. This was as part of one of the discussions with Microsoft as well, because we have been, Tim has a background of this, that about the adaptive card failures and everything. So I think we were able to bring that down to a very good stage, I would say, at this point in time. So one of the proposal was this. So this is not something super critical at our side now, but maybe in a month or two, we would consider onboarding another account with another P1 or P2. Yeah.
Right, and our user population has the standard E3 cal applied with the seeded Power Apps and Flow licenses enabled for part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rest of the
Mukesh,
users
just
is E3.
out of curiosity here, so for those looking to potentially deliver something in their organization, what kind of time and investment did this take for you guys to build what you just showed?
The initial setup was the first 3 to 4, I would say 3 to 4 months time. We invested a lot in building all these solutions. And then, right, then from a process perspective, there were a lot of challenges and minor changes and all that I have to, incorporate after getting some feedbacks. But otherwise, I would say of 3 to 4 months, full investment of time was there to get this, working as we need. But I think we went live after 6 months of time. It actually took.
Mukesh, this was also your first attempt at using Power Apps and Flow.
Yep,
to
that's right.
build anything, right?
Oh,
So
really?
there was a bit of a
this was my first time.
He was brand new to him when he started this, so it was a bit of a learning curve. And I would say, he knocked this one out of the park quite rapidly, as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, I was going to say, the way you were walking through this, I had assumed you did a bunch of these.
No. So now I'm super good with Flow. You tell me anything, I can deliver something in 2 or 3 hours. So
I test him regularly on that.
So we incorporated a lot of things on the fly. Yeah. So this one, the initial learning was like around 3 to 4 months it took. I kept bothering Akash and his contacts in Microsoft and for more and more informations and everything. But then we started picking up things by ourselves. I was looking into things, and but it really needed a lot of investment in the beginning. Yeah.
So Tim is answering this question as we speak with Sebastian. That's a great question. He was saying, so he missed, I guess, where this pops up. And correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but what happens once the user creates the new team, this is what's populated into the channel for them after the team has been created. What he was wondering though is, can you do this in the UX while the user is creating the team? I don't believe we have those APIs available, but correct me if I'm wrong.
No, what we're doing right now. And Mukesh, you could correct me here. What we want to do is have this posted directly into the team itself, because then you get the highest visibility of the members of the team, not just the owners seeing it, so that if there's an update needed for more ownership or the reminders that's not being acknowledged, you have more eyeballs on it. We're not able to do that today unless we're adding the account that's processing this to become a member of the team, and then posting it as an adaptive card within the team, and then removing that account as the member. What we're doing is targeting the adaptive message just to the owner in Teams chat, so they're receiving a message from a flow in a chat message.
Awesome.
And that's within 24 hours of the creation.
Yeah. And one that's hot off the press, our Eng guys have just published on GitHub a request a team app, where you can basically automate some of this process at the front on the UX side. So I'll post that as a response, Sebastian, to your question.
Good call out.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm doing it on a 24-hour basis is that it's all depends on the performance, right? Because for Novartis, it's like 150,000 user base, and this basically runs for 3 hours, most of the days. So I didn't want to run this over and over again, and because it has a lot of HTTP and API calls behind the scene, and there could be we could potentially fine tune maybe the query that we are using. As I said, it's being called yesterday. It could be something maybe could be leveraged as well on an hour basis or something. I'm not sure. I haven't tried that, but yeah, today we are processing it every 24 hours. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So I'll switch to the second flow. So this is the notification flow. Okay, so there are a few variables which are not really useful here because I'm doing a lot of testing. But I'll take you guys through the key functionalities here. So the moment a new entry is added into the SharePoint list, the inventory list, this flow gets triggered. As I said, it every 5 seconds a new entry gets added. That's the way the other first flow is fine-tuned. Then we have the client ID, secret teams, and everything. Here I generate site ID URL using where is that? Okay, a direct graph call is there to get the site ID URL, and the site ID and the site URL both we needed in the next flow. So this will be generated here and then updated in the SharePoint list as this flow progress. And the site ID creation is not that straightforward because you use this query to get the data, and then the problem is that you have to it gets you get it as an JSON parse the JSON and then readable format. And here you get the ID, and the part with this ID is that comes with our whatever your SharePoint URL domain plus the site collection and the web ID. So you have to convert this into an array, and then you have to pick which one you need. So it's like not a straightforward way to get the site ID. So this is where you pick the site ID, and this is being used in the external file sharing process. Like if you want to enable external file sharing, you need to pass the external, the site ID as a REST API call. Okay, this is not really needed. Get teams RAM just testing something as part of the processes change. So here is the team's owner data. This is where we understand how many owners are there in a particular team. So we get that through a graph call again. I can.
So real quick on this one, Mikesh, so I just had a question. I remember you asking us about this as you guys were building it, is how you're posting to the Teams channel with the flow, given that you need permissions to the new provision team.
Yeah. So posting is, we get all these data, okay? We get all these variables, site ID, URL, and the owner count and everything. And then I update all these data information here into this as like the number of owners in the teams, site URL, site ID. And then we use the post URL on adaptive card as a flow bot. Okay, so this is the mechanism which post. As you all see, this is in preview. So there has been a lot of challenges with this because we have seen that if there were 100 instances, we could see in the beginning, we could see that around 50 were failing. Then we fine-tuned the number of instance creation, like putting that 5 seconds delay, which actually brought down it to a 70. And then we identified that when this particular flow was running, there was an overlap with another flow, which is the bi-weekly reminder, which was running every 2 hours or something. So we just, tweaked the schedule of the reminder flow. Now, I would say for the past 3-4 days, we didn't see any adaptive card failures, which is promising. So I think we are kind of taking care of that. Yeah, Tim. So for the past 3 days, we couldn't get anything. So I think we are good. But even if there is a failure, we have a mechanism behind the scene to take care of that. We have a schedule running every evenings of the Central European time zone to check if there is any adaptive card failures. If there are failures, the script will just remove those entries from the list and then just re-add it using a PNP PowerShell. So when we do the second iteration, we have seen there are no failures at all. So this is still in preview. This is what I heard from engineering team as well. Since this is in preview, the throttling and the thresholds and everything is like, they cannot comment on this completely. So we're just trying to map this back to whatever best practices are in place today. Yeah, so Jace, this is the the team posting. So this will directly post to the owners teams chat as a flow bot.
Got it.
Yeah.
And let's walk through.
Yeah. And okay, once this is done, we do some updates. Like this is quite interesting. So owner responded to no is like very I would say organizational need. It's not mandatory to have this field, but we use it for a couple of other things like purging mechanism within SharePoint list, and a few reminder things and all. But set reminder date is like quite interesting. This is a much needed one. This we rolled out like a month ago because our reminders were not a month, I would say 2 months, because our reminders were not really going as expected. So what we're doing is that the moment we did a successful communication because we have a error handling here as well, because by any chance if post adaptive card is failing, it picks up here and it just adds it here as an adaptive card failure and put the error message as well. But if this is successful, it comes here out of the list and it updates a format. It uses a format date time function and it updates get future time 2 weeks. So it updates this date for reminder like 2 weeks from today. And there's a reminder flow runs every day, which does a calculation like if this value matches with today's value. And if that's the case, it sends a notification. So we made it like pretty simple using this logic. So we are pre-feeding this data rather than doing any math. So yeah, so this is the second flow. This is basically about the notification and getting the honor count and everything. And I will switch to the third one, which is the the super guy. I mean, he does a lot of work. So here it comes. This is a recurring, it's a scheduled one. It runs every 4 hours at our side. And it doesn't have an overlap with any of the other pieces. So it gets the item like honor responded equals no, and division equals not equal to null. So for us using the Power Apps, I would say division is one of the values which is a mandatory value, I would say. So the moment a user opens the Power Apps without a value in division, you cannot submit that form. So we get the items using division not equal to null, which means okay, somebody has updated the form, or that value is valid for further processing. And then we define all the client ID secret and and this app, I want to tell you that because it does a lot of things. It requires a group read write. I can go back and check what are the. It requires a 4 or 5 API access, including group read write, application, and delegated. And also, as I said, in the audit logs. And also for injecting tab, I think you need another permission as well. So these are the permissions associated with this app. Then we define the variables, whatever we are going to use it, like the additional honor. Like if there is only single honor, we need to use all these things in the graph post queries. We compose Teams ID, everything being taken from the list, Teams ID, division value, SharePoint external value. This is like whether you need external sharing or not, domain for the external sharing. So in Novartis, if you need to enable external file sharing, you can enable it only for a specific domain because we do not allow blanket opening of the external file shares. Then it's a site ID, site URL. I'm also getting the primary channel ID. This will be explained down the line because we are adding another tab as well as part of the external sharing. So once I come here, this is the place where we first check whether it's qualified for enabling external sharing. So we check if the external sharing value is yes, and also we are improvising our external sharing process within Novartis, wherein the user or the requester or the owner of the team has to give a consent saying that they aligned with our file sharing processes and the guidelines. So if these two values falls under yes and agree, we take it up and I give again another couple of seconds delay before an HTTP REST API call. So this is a HTTP call to SharePoint tenant enabling external sharing. So right after that, you see an error handling mechanism as well, because we have seen that if somebody paused a wrong, I wouldn't say wrong domain, but I would say if a space or some sort of extra characters in the domain, what we have seen that the REST API will enable external sharing, but it doesn't set us the domain. So it's like an open external sharing. So any such failure will be taken up here, and it will just simply set external sharing to disable the file sharing in SharePoint. At this moment, we are not sending any communication out to the user saying that, okay, this is, you have to open a ticket or something, but we might, after checking with the UX, like, how the communication should be taken up, we might put that as well in here. So any error will be captured in the error message saying that external sharing domain error. And so that any point in time, we can go ahead and check it. In fact, I've seen that because one of the users came back to me and said that, hey, this is not working. I put in this. So it was easy for us to see. When open the logs, okay, there is an external shared domain error. Then you go back and check. Then it says that there was a wrong entry. So it's pretty cool in that way. So this is the Azure Automation webhook I was talking about. At the moment we enable external sharing for SharePoint site, we inject site property back into the SharePoint site saying that external sharing is enabled. This is associated with another service which we have in place for external sharing SharePoint site services. So to align with that, we inject this property. Today we are doing it only for external sharing, but I think down the line it's going to have more and more site property bags we're going to inject through the same scripts. Another thing is that the enhancement that we're going to have in the next month or so, the moment external sharing, file sharing is enabled in the Teams, what we are planning to do is that we're going to enable, or we're going to change the display name of the team by appending an external into the display name. Okay, the team owner can change it, but as a best practice or as a governance policy, we're going to put this in place. Followed by, so this is done, it's pretty simple. The request body will look like this and then call the HTTP using that body. And then the last step with external sharing is that right after enabling external sharing, we are adding another tab into the general channel as a website hosting the document, which talks about the file sharing governance document. So this will be like the best practices that a team owner should follow when it comes to the file sharing and external services. And the last step is that we send, this is not yet confirmed, but most likely this email will be gone to the support organization saying that, we have enabled external sharing for this specific team and the owner has given the consent and, this is the form and all these details. So that is for the external sharing piece. Once that is done, yep.
I was going to say, Mukesh, I want to make sure we get a chance to cover the impact of the solution. But real quick, a question came up on the naming conventions. It's been asked a couple of times, and Nick's responding here. But how did you guys consider the naming convention there? And I mean, are you planning on enforcing that for all team creation moving forward, or what are the thoughts?
So again, this goes back to our unboss culture, and we don't use naming conventions on the URLs. We don't provide the restrictions. The benefits of the naming conventions apply more towards the IT backend and how we have to do our support. So what we're doing is we're taking those pieces that normally we would put into the string of a naming convention, and we're injecting those properties into the site properties so that we can query on demand dynamic inventories of the sites that we need with those properties, rather than expanding on the string and the URL, which is not as meaningful to the end users.
Got it. Great call.
Yeah,
awesome.
And also that has limitations, like it has only 6 or 7 attributes opened for the naming convention, and there are no custom attributes encouraged at this point in time. So yeah.
We did look into it at the start of our governance work.
That's great to hear. And Mukesh, maybe it's just closing out on the flow here. Any last things that you want to cover up on what you guys did here on the third flow?
No, this is so this is the external sharing piece with this, and it has then the the key piece which Nick just spoke about, like the attribute injection into the groups, like the division, for example, right? We have the schema extension used with the Graph Explorer to define custom attributes at the group level, or 365 group, like division, SharePoint externals, and we're going to do that for owner division as well, like more of like an unverified way of injecting properties if there is no response from an owner. So all these functionalities will be taken care here in this one. And then the last check here today happening is the additional owner check. If there is a value for additional owner, we update the additional owner for the end user, and it gets reflected in 3 or 4 hours, I believe, because from graph to teams, that inheritance is taking some time, but it's well received so far. Nobody has raised a flag saying that there is a problem, but yeah. And once that is done, we update our certain things, which, like the automate complete and all to yes. So this is the third one. And I have one more flow, which is the bi-weekly, which I talked about. This runs on a daily basis.
This one just real quick at a high level. I want to make sure you guys get a chance to cover the impact and everything.
So this runs on a daily basis, like every 4 hours or something, and it picks the first 200 items which never got a response after from the end user, and then we put it through the loop and checks. And what we do is that I make sure that we calling another HTTP to recheck the on account before throwing a form into the into the user's face saying that, hey, you go and update this, but we are validating that the team is existing, because if HTTP fails, the team is no more existing. We are doing some calculations there, and also we revalidate like number of on accounts, like whether it is still one or it's more than one. If it is not one, we do not want to ask them to put more additional owners or anything, right? So here we do a counter check, like the reminders. So we are sending the first 2 reminders in Teams as a chat using the adaptive card. The third one being sent as an email at this point in time. And we do not have any action item like what happens if somebody doesn't respond after third reminder, but that's what I'm just working on. Like I'm trying to get the user profile properties of the owner itself. And if there are no response after third reminder, like in a 2 weeks time, I'm planning to inject all these properties into the group custom attribute and saying that, okay, this is closed. And if there is a change, we take it as a revalidation process or something in a near time. Yep. So
it's amazing, man, especially knowing, which I didn't know going into this call, that you hadn't even worked on Flow before this whole process of Power Automate. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So let me, I'll pull these slides back up here, and thanks so much for walking us through that, Mukesh.
No problem.
I get the slides back up. And then as we leave the slide up for a second, Nick, there was a great question that I think is a really important one that a lot of organizations ask from Sebastian again. And he said, what's your mental decision tree when it comes to building something on your own versus waiting for Microsoft to bring it out of the box? How do you think about budget? How long do you stay on your custom processes when we have functionality that arrives, et cetera?
Yeah, I think ideally we always go to Microsoft first, and we present our business case and we talk about the design change request, or is this in the roadmap, and because we do feel that certain things should be delivered as part of the product since it's a service that we're paying for. In this case, that was not going to be feasible, that we would have all the controls that we needed to have this at service launch, and we didn't want to go live without having the proper governance in place and then spend the next 2 years cleaning up the estate, trying to bring everything back into the state that we wanted to. And when we looked at the alternatives of the third-party products on the market that we could buy and what we were able to build by ourselves, once we decided to explore the graph and Power Apps, and I challenged Mukesh to take this up as part of his objectives last year, and we found that this was something that we would be able to do at low cost and fairly rapid implementation. It was a no-brainer for us to proceed in this way.
Awesome. I mean, it's I love the process. I mean, it's simple but profound, right? I mean, the way you guys look at it, and so I think this hopefully will be very valuable for a lot of organizations. So appreciate you sharing it. Nick or Mukesh, any call outs you want to have here on the impact the solutions had inside of Novartis?
From a customer service perspective, it's been really well received, right? Because we're not hampering anyone's processes. They're able to start using Teams and working with it right away, and we're backloading all of the IT requirements to the end as we need. From an IT perspective, I think we still have some gaps that we need to close to get the response rate up. But the things Mukesh talked about enhancing the solution to be able to pull the profile properties from the users individually, to do a pre-population, to have a more complete inventory off the bat, that just then requires verification, and we could have a verified, unverified status on the properties. That'll bring a more completeness around the solution.
And I guess the other thing I'd call out here is that because you have something in place, it's really easy to adapt and modify and build on. Like I can see with the additional flows that Mukesh has put in place, you've invested the time and you've got a solution in place. This allows you to do much more customizable governance than pretty much anything else that I've ever seen.
Yep. That's the
Absolutely.
easy thing. That's one is this is scalable. Other thing is when we have a new requirement, or when Nick and I talk about, we get some of the other thing, new ideas pops up, and we can easily relate where I can plug this piece into the existing solution, right? So we don't want to rework on everything for a new piece. So this user profile calling, trust me, it's not straightforward. Okay, I've been working on this like for the past 2 or 3 days. I mean, since Friday, I'm working on it. Today, I have a breakthrough. I've started populating, user profile properties. But that's what I said. It's like 3 full day investment. I had to give it for this one. So it's quite interesting because it's just 2 or 3 steps, but it's all about how you put it together and where do you plug it in to get the right value out, right? So that's what it is. So you called it out rightly. Yep, it's.
And I think that. Sorry, Jace. I was just going to say, I think there's a really interesting part there to sort of coming back to what's the mental model around investing in this. One of the things you want to think about is that once you have a framework in place like this, it's going to reduce your technical costs down the track to implement. I think it was Sebastian was asking that question, and sort of along the lines of what Lex was asking as well around, hey, why doesn't Microsoft build all of this? What we want to do is empower you to have the framework so that you can implement your own solutions that meet your own needs, because we can't anticipate everything that comes up for you. And this is a really good way that I've seen for doing that.
Well said. In the last few minutes that we have left here, I'd love that you guys put this on here, because we recognize this is never going to be a perfect process, right? And so any particular things that you want to call out here, Mikesh or Nick, maybe not going through the whole slide, but some of the key ones.
So more than the limitations, I think there is a way to get around with all these. As I said, putting the delays and making sure that it's a process. It's a learning process. It was a learning curve for us as well, like how to improve the solution. So the last part is very interesting. The third point in the technical considerations: small minority of users blocking flow bot, which is very interesting. Somebody can just go and block the flow bot, and in that case, your adaptive card will fail with a 403 unauthorized error, and that you wouldn't be able to send a notification. So in that case, we can do. I still know what to do with the improvisation. Catch that and send an email instead, right? So it's very simple. But we don't want to do that as an email. Nick and I were talking about this, that we would like to go with post this directly into the Teams. So this is not possible today with the permission type limitations what we have, because the group read write all posting to a Teams work only under the delegated permission type, which means I or the account which is doing this operation needs to be a member of the Teams. So that's tricky, because Jays, the background of this, right? We put in a request with Paul. So I'm just emphasizing on that. I would say this is quite critical and important for a governance or a platform team to send some notifications to the teams across the tenant if this post message comes under application permission type in the Graph API. So that is the last point, like future post to Teams channel directly, application permission type not available with Graph. So this is a limitation for us. So yeah, I think I would like to place this as a request in this forum itself, so that you guys get the feedback, like live, like what challenge. This is not just for this scenario. We are looking at guest access review, and we want to post, right? Like we were talking about.
Yeah, and just to pile on to that requirement, I talked about activity-based expiration policies at the start of this, right? So any interaction that we have with the teams in the future that we want to go through this similar model, we want to make sure that our communications and the messages that we're targeting to teams don't offset that activity and reset the clock, so that an inactive team gets triggered active because of something that we pushed. It's like Mikesh said, if we're asking for revalidation or external guest reviews, and that needs to be a separate activity that doesn't flag activity for the group itself.
Yeah. Duly noted on that one, by the way. We've been raising it on your behalf for what it's worth.
Yeah.
And then Not to go through again this whole one, because we're pretty much at time here, but just to close out for you guys, anything particularly that you're most excited about on the next release or on the pipeline?
Next release, everything is super cool, and we're excited to see how that's coming around. And the pipeline, post to MS Team channel, we just talked about action item. We were first initially thinking about archiving a team, but I think the better solution is, as I said, if there is no response, we consider owner's user property as the baseline, and we just inject that. And at a later point in time, towards the last point, which is the annual revalidation. So during the annual revalidation, we just send a form to either to the team's channel or to the owners directly saying that, hey, this is what the information what we have about your group, please validate, or something that sort. So that's the pipeline. We haven't touched that. Maybe by end of this year, maybe I would just try to pick that up and see how to put a process around for the annual revalidation process. Yep.
That's great. Nick, Mukesh, any last thoughts here? I mean, you guys are legends. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. But before we close out, wanted to give you guys an opportunity if there's anything else to cover. Not that we haven't covered plenty.
No, this was great. I'm glad we had an opportunity to come here and share our experience and what we were able to build for Novartis. We had a lot of support from Microsoft in putting this together, so I was glad to be able to share it back.
Yep.
Big thanks to sorry. Big thanks to Tim and Eve as well for joining on the call. One thing I did want to call out, Tim referenced it earlier, and there's been some questions on it, is we will be sending these links out as well afterwards in order to get started. So obviously Power Platform is where you can start if you want to build something similar to what Mukesh and team have built here. We also have the licensing considerations. As mentioned, we now have a Teams app template available that can get you started with this whole process. And these are open source, available on GitHub. And there's a couple other options that we'll, again, share links for down here for some partners that have also created some solutions around governance. And then last thing here, just a selfish little plug, but we're actually going to be doing a monthly community call in 3 different time zones around the planet, and that'll be starting next week. And that's a direct link to register. And the goal of these is showing more of these real scenarios and how organizations are tackling some of the most common challenges that we're seeing around the planet. Governance obviously being a huge one, which is why we have a separate event for today. But we look forward to inviting any of you to join in your organization if this is valuable and you want to keep the conversation going with us. And then finally, a reminder, because I know we always get the question, but I will link the recording in the next 24 hours. But gents, thank you again. Tim and Eve, really appreciate you guys setting this whole thing up and all the hard work you guys do from Microsoft for the customer. But Novartis, you guys are amazing. Really incredible to see the amount of growth you guys have had over the past very short amount of time, a few months, and the way you're approaching and tackling this scenario.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. And there are some questions still in Q&A. We'll answer those and get back to you after the meeting finishes.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.